Hey everyone, this is Louis7, and in this video I will be covering a guide for the Blue Line Hunter in the Lord of the Rings Online. This will be another trade analysis and starter build with the recently updated Hunter gameplay again in the Blue Line here. And to note, I did one for the Red Line a while back, which is mostly up to date with the traits if you are interested in that, but it was before their update and buff. And I also did one on the Yellow Line more recently, which is actually up to date with the recent buffs. But this one will be on the Blue Line again, which is the mobile spec where you can shoot things on the move. The Blue Line is a great spec for leveling because of the high mobility and fast pace. Your opening damage with fights is also pretty high, and on top of that you do have a lot of good survivability and just extra survival tools in the Blue Line, but a big draw with the survivability is you can kite enemies, again shooting on the move. And additionally, even though the overall damage output compared to Red Line and longer fights is a bit low right now, and particularly at high levels, it's still plenty sufficient damage-wise for group content, especially while leveling. And just to point out, this is a starter build where I will focus on the first 50 trait points in the Blue Line. Then after that, I will highlight some notable traits for when you get more trait points in for further in the build. But this will be a detailed analysis, and I will essentially be building out a leveling build to help you get started with the Blue Line Hunter. So now we can move in game, and opening up my trait panel we can see the actual build I have for the Blue Line as it's finished out, and unfortunately I got the position with this all messed up, but this is what it looks like. The 50 trait point build I will actually recommend at the end of this, but we can go ahead and respec and start from the beginning. So the very first thing when you actually spec into Blue Line, we'll go with the green text here, is your induction attacks can be used on the move. So like normally you can't use barbed arrow. If I try to move, it will be interrupted. So normally you can't do that, but speccing into the Blue Line again, it's going to be mobile with that. So that is a big thing. Another big thing is you will not lose focus while moving. So typically you do lose focus while moving. You see my focus bar down here, I'm losing it, but I'm also gaining it because I am in precision stance, which gives me focus over time. But that's another notable thing with the Blue Line. And on top of that, you also usually have a mischance penalty, but you won't have that in the Blue Line. So before I actually spec in, we need to look at the actual skills. And the first one here is a melee skill, which adds a little bit of focus to focus on a short cooldown. And it does a little bit of damage, but the main draw of that is it actually removes the barbed arrow bleed to deal additional damage immediately. So I will say this at low levels does a moderate amount of damage to bleed removal, but by high levels, the bleed with barbed arrow will be pretty significant and you won't actually want to remove that bleed in like typical combat, but it is something you can use for burst damage, definitely. And then moving on, we have Barrage, which is going to be our main skill we get in the Blue Line. That has a short cooldown, and the way it works is it will tier up over combat up to tier 3, and after tier 3 you'll actually get a longer cooldown. It'll go to a 15-second cooldown to completely reset Barrage. But that gains increased damage and power cost with each use. Again, it'll be our main focus consumer in the Blue Line. And just so you all know, the focus of the Blue Line is on your focus consumers, and I will say focus a lot in this episode because Blue Line focuses on focus consumers, so I'll try to say emphasizes on focus consumers instead to not be confusing. But anyway, that was just something to note. But the first traits in this row, we have a flat range damage increase, or we can get this trait which increases the damage of our focus consumers. Again, we emphasize our focus consumers in the Blue Line. So one thing I will point out is at very low levels, you won't have much with consuming focus. You mainly have Blood Arrow, that'll be a 20-second cooldown, so I won't use that often. After you use Barrage a few times, it will reset, so you won't be able to consume focus with that for like 15 seconds again. And Penetrating Shot, I have improved Penetrating Shot because I'm high level, but that will have a 3-second cooldown to start as well. So there will be periods where you just don't have many focus consumers to use and you're at like maximum focus at low levels. But in general, if you're comparing 25% damage for skills that consume focus to 5% just flat damage, the one that can, for the boost here that, let me restart that, the damage boost for focus consumers will be better, but at very low level, if you really want to min-max, I would recommend getting the range damage. Otherwise, for just general purposes, I would go ahead and put 5 points in Strong Draw. And another thing to look at with Strong Draw is it does have a rank 6, and rank 6 does not actually impact the damage that your focus consumers does. What it does is any skill that consumes focus, it will have a small chance to reduce the focus cost of all skills by 1 for 8 seconds. So if you're using a bunch of focus consumers, over time you will probably get that buff and all of your focus consumers will actually cost 1 less focus. So like Penetrating Shot will consume 2 focus, and Merciful Shot will consume 5, and Barrage there will only consume 2 as well. So that will help you keep up your focus consumers and just keeping on using those. So that would definitely be something to consider, but after putting 5 points in it, we do unlock the next row and set bonus. So the first set bonus here is we actually remove the induction movement penalty to show that a little bit. Even though I can cast Swift Bow on the move, my character actually slows down. It's probably hard to see there. I don't want to hit the enemy and like start gameplay, but you can see I slow down a little bit when I try to use Swift Bow on the move there, but getting the set bonus will remove that. And it's going to be a very nice thing. It will increase the pace with Blue Line on my low level Hunter. It definitely helped. But we can go ahead and move on to the traits in this row, and the first one here is Press Onward. This is a quick cooldown skill that will increase your morale and restore some power. So that is good for survivability and restoring power. Blue Line Hunter definitely has, at least relatively, has power problems. You can use potions and cooldowns like Press Onward to help with that. But it is just something to note that the power restore will actually probably be useful. It's kind of not too common in LOTRO nowadays, but I think that will be useful for you. Even while leveling, I sometimes run out of power on my hunters if I'm doing a bunch of chain pulling, which is one of the things Blue Line. You can just keep going, keep attacking enemies, keep being on the move. Eventually I run out of power, unfortunately. But the other traits in this row is Quick Shot has a chance to build another focus. So at baseline, Quick Shot builds 1 focus. It's a very short induction skill, but it actually already has a small chance to give you 1 focus. So it does have a 30% chance to build 2 focus instead of 1. This just increases that chance up to 50% from the 30% at baseline if you get all 5 ranks. So that will be something that's good. It will help our focus generation for the times when we can't use our focus consumers. And just one thing to note, as I mentioned, at low levels you will probably have periods where you're maximized on focus and just don't have any focus consumers available. But when you get improved Penetrating Shot, that does remove the cooldown of Penetrating Shot. So that's like insanely helpful that you can just spam something that consumes focus and will be just something to note at higher level. And then for Split Shot, that is the next trait in this row rather. This one is going to be our Blue Line AoE attack. Now, it's not a very strong AoE, but it gives you an AoE as an option. For leveling, I definitely like this because it's pretty strong and you can even use it when there are like 2 mobs at once and it'll deal plenty of damage. Even to a single target, the damage it does is not actually very bad. It's just not particularly great and it has a long induction. So it's probably not always going to be worth using on a single target, but it is an option always that you could even do that, just because especially at low level the damage on that is pretty strong. So what I first recommend in this row is actually getting Split Shot so you have that skill, and then getting Press Onward will be good. You might never have power issues or even morale issues, but it is an emergency like cooldown button I think is good to have. But of course you can build, if you never have any issues like that, you don't have to put your trait point in that and you can focus on something that gives you increased damage. But at this point I would recommend going ahead and getting Strong Draw. Again, that will reduce the focus costs of all your skills by 1 for 8 seconds after using a skill that costs focus. You'll have a small chance to proc that, and it's definitely a good trait to have. Otherwise, we have to backfill, and the real question is, I didn't actually look at the more ranks and Split Shot. So more ranks and Split Shot just gives it more targets. If you ever have a situation where you really need Split Shot to hit more than 5 targets, you could put points in that. But I don't do that, and in general just wouldn't recommend it. There aren't many situations where you really need that extra target AoE from a hunter. They already have limited AoE as it is, at least the Blue Line does. But anyway, for the Quick Shot focus versus flat range damage, I would actually recommend the flat range damage because you don't want to be using Quick Shot that much, and getting the bonus focus from that 50% chance instead of 30% chance isn't going to be the most impactful, and just getting flat damage increase will be better for your performance. But moving on, this unlocks the next set bonus and row. So the first set bonus, or this set bonus here, is every harmful skill you have a 10% chance to give you 10% run speed. So that's a very small chance for a small run speed boost. So basically every once in a while, you'll notice you move a little bit faster is the way that will play out. But otherwise, for the traits in this row, we have one that affects press onward. It will give plus 2.5% to the press onward heal per rank. And of note, that does actually make it restore like 15% of max morale. It isn't 2.5% of the 12.5%, so it is pretty effective. And if you need a stronger morale restore or power restore from that, it's definitely worth putting some points in perseverance. Otherwise, on this row, we have find the path movement speed. This one's a bit odd because moving faster is nice, but it doesn't actually impact your gameplay too much because find the path is out of combat. So that's only out of combat, which you would often be on your mount if you do have a mount. You would be on that out of combat. And it does have like, I guess, some fringe uses. If you want that, it's just notable that you can put your points here to get the increased movement speed, but I do not. The other trait in this row is interesting because it, first of all, adds a power restore to intent concentration, but it also reduces the cooldown of intent concentration. So intent concentration, it adds 9 focus, so that seems like a really good thing, but it has a 3-minute cooldown, so you can't use it that frequently. It actually has a very long animation, so if I just use it here, I can use it just to show you all. It just has a super long animation there. And it's kind of annoying in the middle of combat if you really want to gain some focus. It's just going to take a little bit. And that's kind of the problem with that skill, but getting the power restore on it, as I mentioned, the Blue Line Hunter can have power problems, and using even intent concentration just for the power restore can actually be useful. So I think that will be worth putting a point in. The only question is it worth putting a point in right now? And compared to other things, I think it is, just to go ahead and get that benefit out of it, compared to like 1% more range damage, which is our only backfill option right now. That is what I would be putting my points in, and that's how I'd advance to the next row. Again, quick shot focus was our other consideration for traits, but again, if you want perseverance, you can do that. But we can go ahead and move on to the next set bonus in row. So this one, we have barbed arrow increased damage, and it also adds the slow potency to that. So just of note, barbed arrow does reduce the enemy target speed by 10%, but with this, the slow will come to 40%, so that's also 30% for the slow, not only the damage. And just of note, barbed arrow is a skill we want to use. Having the bleed from that is strong in the blue line. The only problem with that skill is it does have a little bit of a long induction, but it is something you want to use and keep the bleed on enemies in general when you're not using your focus consumers. So having that will be a small passive damage boost, and of course the slow will help you even more with kiting. But otherwise, we can move to the traits in this row, and the first one is will make blood arrow actually have a heal over time, and that works. It will give you 5% of morale over 10 seconds, so it's a little bit slow, but it just adds a little bit of a small heal over time boost. Blood arrow already restores 10% morale instantly, so that would be a little bit nice for survivability. In rank 2, we'll make that a 10% heal over time, so blood arrow will overall restore 20% of morale. Now it's getting more significant, and it will have a minus 5 second cooldown, so you can use it as a regular focus consumer, or even a corruption removal, and a morale restore more frequently. The other trait in this row is exsanguinate, and that actually requires you to get the blood arrow ranks, and we'll see why, because exsanguinate is activated by blood arrow, and the activation chance for the ranks in this trait will go from 33% all the way up to 100% at rank 3. So this is a little bit awkward at rank 1 and 2. Whenever you use blood arrow, it won't have a 100% chance to activate exsanguinate, but exsanguinate itself does moderate damage initially, but it has a very strong bleed component to it, and it also does light damage on the bleed, just to note. So getting that will definitely be useful, and even using that every 20 seconds along with blood arrow will definitely be a good thing that we want. It's just a little bit awkward while you build it up. It's kind of feels bad if you're using Blood Arrow and it doesn't proc Exsanguinate, especially if you really want that damage and damage over time. So I did just want to point that out, but the other trait in this row is Hunter damage over time. As I mentioned, we do use Barbed Arrow for the damage over time component on that, but that's actually pretty much all we have in the blue line until we actually get Exsanguinate. And as you probably saw in the initial build, I actually had Heartseeker, and that will be a trait we're going to be looking for in the red line. It's going to be pretty helpful for a few reasons, but one reason is the damage over time will be nice. Also does a bunch of immediate damage. But anyway, as far as the points in this row, we can actually perfectly spend 5 points on Blood Arrow and Exsanguinate in this row, and that will unlock the next row, and I think that's the way you should be going, because again, Exsanguinate is going to be very good to get, and you do buff Blood Arrow in the meantime. Anyway, that does unlock the next set bonus in row, and this set bonus affects Cry of the Hunter, which is our cooldown skill that removes dazes, stuns, and all that stuff when you're knocked out. And then it also gives you a morale bubble, so that's nice, helps you survive a little bit. And on top of that, it will daze nearby enemies and reduce their run speed, so you can daze them, run away. You have a morale bubble. It's just a strong survival skill, also allowing you to remove stuns and things like that. So this will have a decreased cooldown, and it will increase your movement speed by 10%, so you get to run away even faster with that. So that's just pretty nice for a survival skill and general utility as a blue line hunter here. And the first trait in this row is Strength of the Earth, and this one is a bit odd because it does restore power. I've talked a lot about power issues, but this one is a little bit hard to actually recommend putting points in because it just doesn't restore that much power. It does it over 5 seconds, but it restores about 500 power. That's about 10% of my total power. It's just not enough to really make it worth it. Especially it's like easily interrupted. It just takes a long time for you to actually restore the power. And of note, the next set bonus will actually affect that, but even with this set bonus, I don't think it would be worth putting points in Strength of the Earth, but we can look at that when we get to it. Otherwise, in this row, we have Shot Through the Heart, and this one is Heartseeker, and Merciful Shot do additional damage to targets with bleeds on them. Again, it plays to the little bit of a bleed theme we got going on with the Blue Line Hunter, mainly with Barbed Arrow at this point, but also Exsanguinate at this point. And Merciful Shot is a strong focus consumer, so having additional damage on that would be nice. But otherwise, as far as how much impact it will have on your performance, well, Merciful Shot you can only use when enemies are at low health anyway. Below 50% it already does a ton of damage, so you probably wouldn't get too much use out of it doing additional damage just because a target is bleeding. And Heartseeker, we don't even have that now to really consider it, but when we consider it, I think when we get Heartseeker is when it will be worth actually putting points in Shot Through the Heart. So it is a useful trait, it's just right now it doesn't do too much for us. We can look at other things unless we actually find nothing else, but just as a spoiler, we do want Volley. And Volley is pretty crazy. It will affect your blue line gameplay a lot because after using a skill that consumes focus, you will have a chance to make your next bow attack have no induction. So something like Swift Bow or Barbed Arrow that will have no induction if that procs. Additionally, that also applies to Heartseeker, which Heartseeker used to have a much longer induction than 2 seconds, so it was even crazier back then. But even getting the instant cast on Heartseeker, which does a ton of upfront damage and the bleed, would be pretty crazy. So Volley is going to be pretty good even without Heartseeker. Again, we have Swift Bow to build focus pretty quickly. We have Barbed Arrow to do the bleed and get all the good stuff from that. And outside of Volley, really, I never use Swift Bow. I actually very, very infrequently use Swift Bow ever on the Blue Line Hunter. The only time I would do that is if Volley procs and I don't need Barbed Arrow, don't need the bleed from that, and Heartseeker is on cooldown is basically the only situation. But this is going to be pretty good for our gameplay. Again, I definitely recommend putting the full 5 points in it. And just to note, with the full 5 points, it will be a 15% chance that your focus consumers will remove your next bow induction. Otherwise, that does unlock the set bonus in next row. And again, the set bonus affects Power of the Earth, and it will make Power of the Earth. Oh, that's called Strength of the Earth? Ooh. I think I called it Power of the Earth earlier because I'm pretty sure that's what it used to be called. But anyway, Strength of the Earth if I can call it the right name, will now restore morale over time, and it does a tiny bit of morale. It's basically negligible how little morale it restores. Definitely doesn't scale well. And it will also restore focus though, so it does give you a little bit of focus in combat, but that actually isn't too impactful. It takes 5 seconds again to use Strength of the Earth, and that's just a long time to build a little bit of focus. You can much more quickly build focus even just spamming quick shot. So that's not going to be worth it for the focus and not going to be worth it for the morale. And as we covered earlier, it's not worth it for the power, so I just don't end up putting points in that. Otherwise, we do unlock the next traits in this next row. And the first one here is Bow of the Righteous, so you'll actually recover power anytime you use a range skill. Essentially, it works out that it reduces the power cost, but it doesn't actually do that. It just gives you a little bit of power restore when you use a ranged attack. And something like Barrage will have a pretty high immediate power cost, so that is actually a little bit important. But otherwise, that will just help with a little bit of power issues you might have. Otherwise, in this row, we do have Precision, which it says it increases the amount of focus Precision stance generates, and that's true over time. But what it really does is make the Precision stance, it already generates 1 focus every 5 seconds. It just makes it generate the focus quicker, so it's going to be 1 focus every 3 seconds with 2 points in that. And that will help with our focus generation, and is something I would recommend. But for the first point in this row, I'd actually recommend Bow of the Righteous and then getting 2 points in Precision. Otherwise, we have to backfill with some of our previous traits. And for this, we do have Shot Through the Heart as an option, but again, I think that's going to be a lot better once you get Heartseeker. And we also have Barbed Fury, which just increases our damage over time, and I think that would be the better option than Quick Shot Focus. Quick Shot Focus is really a filler type trait and isn't something we immediately want right now. It's just going to be, again, a filler if we have leftover points. Otherwise, the damage over time will be more impactful with things like Barbed Arrow and Exsanguinate and eventually Heartseeker. Otherwise, just putting 2 points in that will unlock the next row, and we get our next set bonus, which is Improved Fleetness. Again, Fleetness is the one every harmful skill you have a 10% chance to increase your run speed by 10%, so very small proc on that. But now that buff will also give you 1 focus every 5 seconds, so that's really not something to rely on. It's basically every once in a while in combat, after roughly on average 10 skills, you will be moving 10% faster and regenerating focus, 1 focus per 5 seconds faster. So it's not going to be the most impactful. It will be a little bit inconsistent just because it is such a low chance. But sometimes you will have that buff on you basically forever, because if it does work by the average after 10 skills, you would be using 10 skills in about the 20-second period or even shorter. So that is just a note. You could have that on you pretty consistently, but just because it is a small chance, it won't always work out that way and isn't something you should rely on. And again, the actual effect from it is pretty minor. But anyway, we can move off that and get into the traits in this row. And the first one here is Moving Target, so you'll gain Evade chance while you are moving. That kind of makes sense and plays to the blue line theme, but I don't think the defensive buff from that is actually going to be worth it. The main thing while moving is that you're actually kiting mobs, and ideally you have Barbed Arrow on them and they're slowed and they won't be able to hit you, but sometimes it's a boss and they will. So if you are having survival issues where you think getting Evade chance, a 5% chance to evade 1 in every 20 enemy attacks, will be helpful to your survival for whatever you're doing on the Blue Line Hunter, you can put a point in that. I just don't do that. And as far as damage goes, definitely don't recommend it because it doesn't increase your damage. Otherwise, the next trait in this row is a cooldown one, which is Rapid Fire. So this is an active cooldown skill that lasts 10 seconds, but it makes bow skills that cost focus no longer have a cost for that duration. So that's pretty crazy, because you have things like Barrage, you can just use that a bunch without it actually consuming focus. But again, with Barrage, that'll reset after 15 seconds, so you really only get 3 uses out of that. But the big thing is actually Penetrating Shot. This has no cooldown and consumes focus, so you can just spam Penetrating Shot while that's up. It's pretty crazy, and you will probably run out of power while doing it, because Rapid fire definitely makes you consume a lot of power with your things, but you even have merciful shot. If you can get the enemy down that low and have merciful shot not actually consume the 6 focus, that's pretty crazy as well. You even have blood arrow, which will be dealing damage but also restoring morale and activating sanguinate. It won't actually cost the focus or consume the focus, it still costs the focus. So that's going to be a pretty crazy cooldown, and you can probably see we're going to pick it. And at this point we have to spend get 4 more ranks and traits actually to get intensified fire, and this is going to be a little bit of an odd moment, but I would actually recommend putting points in the red line. But to note, you have to spend 8 trait points total to get the last set bonus. Otherwise, if you just spent 4 points in the blue line like this isn't actually what I would do, but just to show you all, you would only have to spend 4 points to unlock that. So if you really want this intensified set bonus, I would recommend putting points in the blue line. And if I did that, I would probably get shot through the heart in the last 3 points in the hunter damage over time. But otherwise, let's go ahead and look at the set bonus. So this one is every attack made while rapid fire is active will put a stacking physical mastery buff on the hunter. So that is good when you are using the rapid fire cooldown, because it will increase your damage. If you are at the physical mastery cap, then it will actually have no effect on you. It's not like a percent. My character and most leveling characters probably won't quite be at the physical mastery cap. The cap at baseline is 200%, and I think we have some traits like this. Range damage trait will affect our physical mastery percent. It will actually go up to 120, or I would be at 128.1% ranged, but the cap would be 205% because of that, just to point out with the cap and as far as that like affecting it. But in general, I don't think that's like super impactful enough that you need to spend 4 points immediately in the blue line just to unlock that. I think you could go ahead and backfill these points in the blue line and first get the things we want in the red line, which as we saw earlier was Heartseeker. So as far as the first traits in the row of the red line, we have penetrating shot, increase, it's penetrating shot, critical vulnerability debuff as far as what it says. But the way that actually works is basically you get increased critical chance with penetrating shot on your enemy, up to 10% on that. So of course that's nice, you'll be getting big crits with penetrating shot, you use that a lot. But you also just have a flat increased critical chance that affects all of your skills. So like Barrage, even your builders, barbed arrow, quick shot, blood arrow, all that good stuff. It affects all your skills really, all your range skills. So that's definitely going to be more appealing than the first one, but otherwise we do have fast draw, which makes quick shot decrease the bow induction of your other skills. And again, we focus on our focus consumers, which are instant. We don't really care too much about the inductions. Of course, reducing our inductions is good, but as far as spending trait points on that, I don't think it is worth it. So I'd get 4 points in the critical eye here, and that will unlock the next set bonus. But moving on from there, since we already covered that, I would go ahead and put the 5th point in critical eye to get the 5% range crit chance. And just to look at the other traits in this row, we have one that affects Swift Bow. Again, don't really use Swift Bow too much, but of note, the 5th rank in that is Quick Shot has a 20% chance to reduce the induction of Swift Bow. Again, you don't want to ideally be using Quick Shot and Swift Bow enough that that would actually ever come into play, so not sounding too worth it. This one increases induction bow damage. Of course, we do use our induction bow skills, but increasing the percent damage on those won't impact our performance too much. And the real thing here is Heartseeker. Getting the first point in that will be very effective, and just to point out, it says the second rank is plus 5% Heartseeker bleed pulses, so this has 5 bleed pulses. 5% of 5 is like would round down to 0 or bleed pulses, so it doesn't actually work that way, where it actually adds 5 bleed pulses, so it adds double, it's 200%. It would be plus 100% Heartseeker bleed pulses is how that actually works, but they probably just meant 5 bleed pulses, so Heartseeker will last 20 seconds is the way that works. And that is going to be something you want. But I should point out that immediately that won't be too impactful. If you're just never in long fights, if you're not fighting signatures, even in elite mobs, you could do stuff like that where the Heartseeker damage over time will actually come into play. It's not going to be the most impactful thing to get the second rank in right away. First, we might want to look at some of the traits in the blue line that we passed up that might help make that more impactful. So the first thing we do have is shot through the heart. Now that we have Heartseeker, I think that is worth getting the point in. And we also have Barbed Fury to actually increase the Hunter damage over time, and getting just a broad damage over time increase before we affect the pulse count of one skill is going to be more worth it. So I'd go ahead and backfill those two and then put the last point in Heartseeker. And that is actually kind of where the 50 trait point build ends. So this is a little bit odd. If you have exactly 50 trait points and ever feel like you might need a tiny bit of power restore, you could actually put the point in Strength of the Earth. But otherwise, you could also even just put it in Press Onward. I would recommend that more than Strength of the Earth. And this is how I would end specifically a 50 trait point build, but this is a starter build, so this is kind of to get you started. You really have flexibility on where you continue from here. So moving on to the further in the build section, we do want to finish out Quick Shot Focus. That will be pretty helpful. But otherwise, further in the build, there are some traits in the red line we could get. Burn Hunt would be pretty effective, increasing our damage and decreasing power cost, and getting the full 2 ranks, and that would be pretty crazy with the blue line, of course, and would just be a very strong cooldown to get. It will definitely not help with power. It costs a lot of power, but you can use power potions and some things to negate that. Otherwise, there's not too much in the red line. One thing is Rain of Arrows if you want even more AoE damage with actually a focus consumer. That is an option. Otherwise, in the red line, one of the main things is critical hits generate 1 focus, so you'll be critting a lot in the blue line, and just generating 1 more focus on those will definitely be helpful, because that just means you can use your focus consumers more and more. Otherwise, you do have Mitigation Bypass that's just effectively counts as a flat damage increase on your ranged skills. It's kind of similar to our ranged damage boost here in a way. The other thing is the increased crit chance of penetrating shot, just as an option. Again, you don't really want to do draw weight, swift and true if you can avoid those. Otherwise, there isn't too much in the red line. You do have the Merciful Shot critical multiplier, just increasing the crit damage of that is another thing, but otherwise not too much in the red line that we would really look out for. And just to note, we do have a trait in for the kill for Heartseeker, and the rank, the 1 point in that you can put in, it decreases the incoming healing of enemies. That overall won't come into play too much if you did get to this trait, but getting the plus 25% bleed damage on that would be, if you can find nothing else to put points in, like if you need to fill points in the red line to get further in it, that is something you could do. But also of note, the yellow line actually has a few things we would want. There's Hunter damage over time. Again, we have a lot of damage over time, so getting that affects everything and not just like Heartseeker here would be pretty effective. You also have a lot of survival things, so if you're having trouble surviving and just want more general defenses, getting the increased mitigation here in the L line, even the evade chance could be good. But even for active focus consumers, Explosive Arrow does a lot of damage and would be pretty good to get. Otherwise, you also have Rain of Thorns, which will root enemies. It acts like Rain of Arrows, but it does have a little bit of crowd control worked into it. That is something you could consider if you want that. And just a lot of different options in the yellow line. You could even go and get some of the traps, but in general, Explosive Arrow I think would be a good option to get, but in general I think building towards Deadly Precision in the red line will allow you to maximize your damage with what you have. But I personally like the hybrid builds. It's really up to you where you go from here. Again, the whole point of this video is to get you started on the blue line and not really say where you should go after these first 50 trait points, but I just wanted to highlight some of those options. Anyway, we can go ahead and, as far as my character goes, I'll go ahead and spend my last 3 points and finish out the Quick Shot Focus. But we can go ahead and do this, and I can show the gameplay. So my skill bar is a little bit whack and just hard to get used to with the Hunter just because it's so odd, especially the blue line here. But the point of this gameplay section is going to be that I want to show you all how some of the traits play out and all the things we got. So we did get a ton of things in the blue line, and there are just so many things to show. I feel like that it's going to take a little bit to get to, like the yellow line Hunter. So first of all, in general fight, I just use my focus consumers. I'm not really building focus right now, but now I actually am. And also of note, we have skills like Blindside, which is immediate and adds 3 focus. You also probably saw I got this buff Volley, which will make my next skill instant, so I was able to use Heartseeker without the induction. So that's a pretty good thing with Volley there. And we're even getting all the bleeds going. I don't have any fire oils in general. I'd recommend using fire oils. Unfortunately, this hunter is not that well kitted, so I don't have those, but you would also, I don't know why I just thought of that, but it's something you would have going that this character doesn't. And also to point out, this character does have bad survivability. There's Exsanguinate, go ahead and use that. I would actually use Split Shot here as well, so it hits both the enemies. And you saw it did a little bit of damage, sufficient damage, I guess, to this little orc, the non-signature version. But really, in the gameplay, I'm mainly using my focus consumers, so like Barrage, Penetrating Shot, Merciful Shot. And one thing in general is to use Barrage a lot and try to keep it on the long cooldown. Again, it's going to be one of our main skills. Otherwise, I'm just generally kiting. It looks like there is a minstrel here. I should probably avoid that. So pardoning that interruption, we are back here to show off the gameplay a little bit. And I think this is a good time to show off Rapid Fire. So again, this one, my skills won't actually consume the focus. So I can just I can spam Penetrating Shot again, but I actually do want to get Exsanguinate off. Now I can use Merciful Shot, oh, and he's already dead. And I got Volley, so I can use Heartseeker. And just one thing to point out, it might be hard to tell when you have the Volley buff. You actually do have to look at your icon. I know a lot of players will actually move their vitals over here, and that's just one thing, particularly with the Blue Line Hunter, that you could do to make it easier to see when you have that buff. But in general, I like stuff out of the way. That's why I have my UI everything on the edges and in the corners and out of the way. But that is something I want to point out because I do know other players do that. Having a little bit of lag there. Kind of unfortunate, but I really hope this gameplay section is just showing how you can go about the Blue Line Hunter. Again, I'm always on the move. I can just keep on pulling mobs. After I kill one, I don't really have to worry about that. And even, I don't think I covered Low Cut. That skill also immediately adds, doesn't immediately add, but it does add 3 focus. So just skills like that are also good to look out for in general. So this time I pulled 2 mobs, but should be good. I haven't actually had power issues. I'm kind of surprised in general, especially when I've done gameplay and all the testing on this character before this guide. I was like running into power issues. It looks like I might be about to have some, so I can use Heartseeker with no focus cost, and I'll go ahead and actually use Intent Concentration to restore my focus and restore my power. But this would be a good time to use Press Onward. Could have used it in combat there. Otherwise, I'm ready to go, and again, that's the thing with the Blue Line Hunter, always ready to go, always ready to do damage. I'll go ahead and get, as far as like waiting for cooldowns, I'll go ahead and use Barbed Arrow. And man, still having some lag. You all can probably see it. It's unfortunate in this, especially like right now. Quick Shot should have gone off a few times there. But yeah, LOTRO in general has had some recent server issues. Usually with me it's just minor lag like this, but it is still lag nonetheless. Anyway, going to go ahead and use a bunch of focus consumers on him, and I didn't even see that I had the Volley buff there. You all probably saw Barbed Arrow was instant because of that. And one thing I have not shown you all is Scourging Blow and the bleed removal from that. So this can be a little bit dangerous because my Hunter is super squishy here because of gear, and it's Mordor and the Light of Arundel system, so this could be dangerous. But just to show, the damage from the bleed removal wasn't actually that strong compared to the bleed from Barbed Arrow. It did a little bit more than 1 bleed tick, but not enough to really make it worth removing that actual bleed. So I should have power potions on this character, I just don't have them on my skill bar. That's one thing, my hunters are the ones that use all my power potions. Got a strong crit there. Again, that's one thing with the Blue Line Hunter. Got almost a 50k crit with Barrage tier 3, I think there. This would be a good time to use Split Shot again. Haven't used it too much, but there's just not much AoE here. And actually Split Shot crit this little orc for 30,000. And that's like half his morale, so it does show, I think, that Split Shot can be worth it. But as far as the rest of this gameplay section goes, I know it's been a little bit long, but I feel like it's the most helpful part of these videos, tucked in like right at the end. And I think I just got hit for like a lot, because I was doing good on my morale and then like suddenly went and died. So I'll go ahead and revive here. and get set up. This is one thing, if you do have to set up the hunter, just quickly use your focus skill, and it looks like I pulled another orc, so hopefully I can kite these. I'll go ahead and use low cut. Not sure it hit them, but use a bunch of quick shot, build up my focus. I'll even use a potion. Here's a good time to show Cry of the Hunter. Oh, and I do have a friend helping me, that is good. But this is a good time to use Intent Concentration for the power restore, use Blood Arrow, get my morale up. As we saw, I can take a bunch of damage here, and got through that. Go ahead and get this last Mordor guard here. And again, I hope this gameplay section did show a little bit more how the blue line traits and just blue line hunter in general plays out. But otherwise, as far as this guide in general goes, I hope you all did enjoy it and learned from it. And one thing with it is, if you still have any feedback, as I'm getting back to doing these guides and pretty much continuing them in the same format that I used to, if you have any feedback, definitely share it. I definitely appreciate that. Otherwise, if you did enjoy this or learn something from it, please consider liking and subscribing for more, or becoming a channel member to support the content. And thanks for watching, everyone.